really happy to introduce Mark Goulthporpe. He's Associate Professor at MIT, School of Architecture, Department of Architecture. He teaches
Man in the box.
It was very technological that he's here by Skype. We hope that Skype connection is wonderful and carries you through. I first got to know about Mark's work in the project quite a while ago, which was a wonderful metal fabrication called My. And I think he's developed through multiple projects, including the Hypo Circus, which many of you might have heard of, which I think recently gained a Google Creative Award.
That's right, yeah.
And so he's, in some ways, for many years actually, he's been developing this practice of design and research. His recent initiatives within, because he is director of dECOi Architects, he also runs or directs Zero Plus as well. And he's looking at robotics within the construction process now. I think his books, Autoplastic to Alloplastic, published by Comptu as well, and the possibility of hand architecture by Ravish as well, a good reference reading. But I think, again, another practitioner and academic, and I think that the meeting of those two is extremely interesting. So I'm really happy to welcome Mark, and thanks for being here to speak with us.
So I start with a prototype agripod we just completed as a form of sort of prospective performative proto-architecture. This, a couple of years of extraordinary effort and learning by a group of experts, resulting in a quite humble little box of food, which I circle around to in my consideration of the notions of design research. I've called this impromptu talk the Apparatus of Electracy, meaning to reflect a little on the shift in base, socio-intellectual register as we adapt to new technical apparati that shift us from literacy to electracy, a term of Greg Ulmer, which merits reflection on the notions of design and technology, which I often collapse into one term, design technology. And since you've raised it, another by now ubiquitous term, research. All three, design, technology, and research, so overused as to be seemingly meaningless. In fact, Ulmer suggests that design is to electracy what writing is to literacy. Design is to electracy what writing is to literacy, highlighting vividly a profound shift in intellectual engagement from a hermeneutic, analytical tradition of comparative reason to a heuretic, inventive modality of engaged knowing by doing. So I think it's useful to research design or design technology itself at a period of significant change. Not design as research, but research of design, or both, perhaps in my case. I colour research red as a flag to indicate that I've not given it much thought except for your prompt, but to recognise, you're quite right. The dramatic uptake of the term in architectural schools, certainly here in this Technical Research Institute, MIT, where thesis seems to have been overrun by research, and where every second professor is doing research, it seems on the face of it a far cry from architecture, or even of architectural pedagogy. In its lack of invention, it's falling back to a mode of analytical inquiry. And I think you'd instinctively say that practicing architects don't do research. They quite quickly prescribe spatial arrangement of people and materials, more a plastic, graphic, productive drive that seems too time-pressured for any real research. Or at least that's a dumb first take on it. It echoes Hernan Diaz-Alonso's statement as head of SCI-Arc that architects don't do research. Or as Jeff Kittness provokes, the moment the technical is used by architects as an alibi, the architecture vanishes. And he quips, ever witness poignancy in glass art? Now these are valid questions here, we need to answer them. Yet of course there can be poignancy if we're attentive to the shifting apparatus, a term I prefer to technology in its invocation from French apparatus theory of the full social and intellectual changes occasioned by any new technical apparatus. Here, Duchamp's bachelor machine as a sort of leitmotif of new creative aptitude, ushered in by the various avant-garde groups in their appropriation, experimentation, testing of all manner of new techniques borrowed from the various revolutions in media of the industrial period. So apparatus being the total condition resulting from a technical medium, and electracy being the new condition of being, the third ontology, oralcy, literacy, now electracy. And my interest to then speculate as to the emerging design, technology, research primacy within the apparatus of electracy, and to hopefully speak to what seems progressive or optimistic traits in this pervasive activity. Let me then start with a piece of glass art, just to try to include that which is held to be outside of cultural poignancy by a very lucid contemporary critic, at least, of Kibner's. This equates Velt's new, glass water filter vessel I found myself buying last week to replace the somewhat clumsy but ubiquitous American plastic Brita-filter jug, which was fine except for its ugliness, and the plastic gives me the skeeves at present in the apparently estrogen-like effect of it on male fertility. So a very typical, contemporary act, buying a water-filtering domestic objet d'art, this sporting an acronym SOMA, that was tacitly affiliating itself with MoMA. And I puzzle at the efficacy of this exchange, of my motivation to send the crude plastic jug on its way to the great floating plastic mass in the Pacific Ocean, and yet feeling good about myself for doing it, taking pleasure from using it or seeing it even. And so what is that pleasure? In his humane and optimistic little book, Gianni Vattimo offers that we need to rethink design in terms of not a formal but a social aesthetics. Marcuse and Habermas already shifting 20th century aesthetics from the properties held to be inherent in an object to the degree to which any object or act binds people in forms of identity exchange. That in a post-nation digital socius, we wrap ourselves in social semantic objects. Ourselves is the wrong term, since we're no longer a fixed self-identity, but malleable avatars, morphing continually in alloplastic reciprocity to the events and objects around us. 1,000 daily momentary senses of belonging, here to the Scandinavian health set, the minimal sensualists. The red Prada dot on my shoe, then a flash of Latin romanticism as I leave for MIT, before I rev my German turbocharged performative rationality, a typical morning for many of us. And Vattimo marvels at the agility and invention of this new avatar economy, played out through objects and spaces that pull in all manner of ethics and aesthetics into social flow. And it reminds us how pleasurable such mental motility is, a sort of plastic corollary to a digital network, and clearly working on us and for us. Vattimo suggests that design has historically denoted a techno-rational drive to ameliorating the human condition, typically surfacing in periods where there is a significant challenge, such as the need for post-war housing. And he contrasts this with the current design of culture, offering that the base drive is now aimed at new identity formation, even socio-political structure, radical revision of the academy, etc. Not concrete problems, but semantic nuance. But I'd like to revisit his historical assumptions, later in this talk, since disegno, emerging forcefully as a conceptual notion in the Renaissance, seems at its origin to manifest something far more inventive than he allows, which is its implication, implicare, to weave or bind together, of technology. My counterpoint being that design emerges as intellect seeking to witness a new mental technical aptitude. The Renaissance inventions of perspective and printing giving opportunity to allow a new dimension of human cognition to be channeled. dECOi, in fact, developed as a concept that gave intellectual dignity to the visual and plastic arts, raising them alongside literature and music as a new technical register, drawing, and new culturalism. So a profound counter to Kipnis in asserting that all design, in asserting that design has a technical alibi, in fact relies upon it. So in this, Heidegger's profound lament in his shattered post-war Germany for understanding and channeling of our base technical drives, the question concerning technology, still for me merits rereading, for the sense that technology is not that thing external to us, but in fact the absorption of external framing, of the Gestellen or frameworks that our natural curiosity seeks. Technology for Heidegger, thinking back to the Greeks, being the cognitive adaptation to any given technical apparatus. The essence of technology then being nothing technical, as he says, but the impulsion to artwork, to witnessing or bringing forth, materializing a new aptitude, which is poiesis, the creative aspect of Aristotle's three intellectual virtues, theoria, poiesis, and praxis, of theory, creativity, and forgiveness. It's as if he's saying that we're curious monkeys, called upon to frame the world, and then compelled to act on that new knowledge to witness its potential, which is our blessing and our curse, of course, leading Heidegger to demand an ethics, a reflection on the deep consequences of our creativity. Hence his use of the communion cup as the example of technology, a highly crafted object imbued with the technique of the craftsman, but offered as a form of social ethics. And perhaps my water vessel, no longer in service of a religious community, but as a participant in an environmental ethic, an exchange of pure water, and witnessing the benign manufacturing processes in vertical packaging, stands in as a latter-day communal cup, an ethic aesthetic that witnesses not just new forms of personal identity formation, a la Vatimo, but new socio-political structure, community by design, as it were, new forms of collective sensibility through capital and commodity. So technology, in fact, our drive to materializing any emerging frameworks and our adaptations for logics, not just of electrate media, but of ethical community, if we're to heed Heidegger. And if we were then to consider research within the same historical profundity, it would by no means be, in essence, that techno-rational drive to legitimating a proto-rational hypothesis as a legacy of scientific method, but in fact a curiosity to assimilate whatever new framework of knowledge emerges, to in fact speculate, test, assimilate anything that has been outside of our current creative habitude. Perhaps this is the very essence of humanity in its absorption of cooking, say. A lot of burnt offerings in that research, I'd imagine, but permitting far greater efficiency in absorption of nutrition than in our fat-bellied primate cousins. Or language. Language is catachretic in its absorption. We guess at words and assess their meaning. That's how language expands. Cooking in language held to be formative of our remarkable mental aptitude, perhaps permitting that expanded curiosity that is human. And seen this way, rather than in the rather restrictive analytical manner of much research in architecture, which so often substitutes analytical tropes for creative and ethical engagement, lies the real challenge, I think, to open up channels of now communal creativity that are balanced in their pleasurable invention within a new media apparatus. Aesthetics is the dimension of intellection made available, which literacy really didn't allow. And to exhibit a social aesthetics where literacy was largely solitary. So I look for deftness and subtlety in deployment of the technical motility that is offered as we fully engage electracy, perhaps present in so simple an object as a cup of water. Now, in my early design work, I was compelled to probe new creative processes as much as new formal ones, interrogating emerging digital apparati for the shifts in intellection and imagination they offered, and seeking new and often communal forms of design research. As an older architect, I now seek to witness pragmatic and scalable potentials, addressing a socio-political scale. If I'm honest, the primary driver of our early work was processual, seeking out new generative design processes, frequently illinear, born of an instance of intensity, a sort of revealing the captured trace of a dance, tracery from flows, elastic heaves, force as the other of form, to cite Derrida's haunting epithet, a plastic paramorphic logic then instantiated directly into material form, at least conceptually often it was agonizingly difficult. An anti-tectonic in a sense, not built up but released in space, left hanging in space, initially as prototypical objects and sculptures, later brought into full architectural production. Generally, these were highly abstract, digitally inspired formative processes that looked for a material corollary, a sort of reverse focusing into substance. An immateriality in the shimmering glass vessel, languid plastic continuity in the gateway to the South Bank, and the stretched and diaphanous sheath of the Moran Gallery dissolved into fine striations. Each project looked to actualize the virtual, instantiate material from process, not fabricated as such or designed as such, more like change states of sublimation, solid from gas, solid from liquid, often literally. Liquid resin, cast bronze, voids excavated by light, and computation initiating and also following such imagining, every project demanding invention of new digital processes. So this line of interrogation of linear graphic design methodology in favor of an unfolding formationism, and it was really a sort of cultural interrogation of the primacy of causal linear process, so methodological preference for formism that compromises both vision and the referential hegemony on which it relies. But curiously, that which plays methodologically with the conceptual linear inheritance results in forms that take light differently and provoke alternative interpretive semantics, stimulate a primary memory if one can invoke Freud's apocryphal notion. In the absence of reference, one conjures creatively to legitimate the precisely indeterminate object. And we receive many interpretations of these works. So a trauma of aesthetics, or in fact an aesthetics of trauma, an absenting, incomplete teasing of contemplative imagination. Now in my case, from that period of intense immersion in design, in research of design process, so in generative processes, almost never reliant on a given software, typically needing to invent a computational protocol, at least partially. Come more mature projects. Here, the one main office is here in Boston. This for an investment group looking at green buildings and clean energy for its investment portfolio. Penthouse offices of a small and quite elite team, MIT and elsewhere. And we executed this project without plans or even details, which we used as a form of notation for code compliance. So this project was really, we just proposed to chase out as many aspects of the current building hegemony as we possibly could. So it was a proposal to take sustainably forested spruce, from Finland in fact, and to apply digital tooling to it. And so the whole project was conceived as two surfaces. All of the joints for things like glass panels were milled into the surface. And it was shaped as a kind of, alloplastic social mapping. So you came in at the elevator and you were pulled down and you met the managers, and there was a conference room. The reception desk sort of heaves out of the floor to give protection to the receptionist. You come out of the elevator and the reception desk rises to greet you, ceiling stretches for light. So I remember presenting these to the client and seeing them not seeing, that was interesting. But recognizing that there is a new sort of social plastic aesthetic suddenly available, and that the machine, if you flip over entirely to a digital fabrication protocol, the machine doesn't care. So here with a team of, I think the average age was 24, no one had ever built anything before. We set about trying to script everything. So we delivered the toolpath. So there were a variety of nesting algorithms and scripting algorithms, even the lights here. So we'd place the lights with the lighting engineer, it would find the geometry in the ceiling above, which was changing daily, and modify the toolpath. So the first time we gave ourselves over to the algorithm, if you will, we didn't draw any of these details. We simply trusted to an internal rule set, which was an interesting moment. The project really had no drawings. It was this script. So beyond the parametric model, the script delivered everything, and literally we gave toolpath that provided dowel holes and CNC milling to this carpenter, who was a little bemused for a while, but once we got into it, it seemed to work very well. We had almost error-free production, and as it emerged, it was really quite compelling that the trust in the algorithm was suddenly materialized. So we hadn't designed it as such. We'd set the rule set behind the scenes, and everything came off this small CNC machine. The carpenters really enjoyed it. It was the first time, I think, for a long time they'd had a chance to work with their craft, and we took it all the way down to the door handles, the furniture. So every aspect of this was plastically controlled by us. Conference room table. Wherever we reached the end of a sheet of plywood, we applied mathematics to it. There's the vent for the computer, the handle modifies to you, the desk modifies to you, the door handle shapes itself to you. So again, this notion of a sort of soft social ethic aesthetic, if you will, and very, very pleasurable as it emerged. If a little harrowing at times. I suppose that the hope of this investment of technically inventive work is to offer a socially responsive aesthetic, but also a new ethics of material production. Still nascent in their collaborative design logic and in their rethinking of design to fabrication protocols of pre-digital industrial production. And oddly, I'd say I'm more moved by the aspiration to streamline zero-carbon design-build logic, and this is way carbon negative, than to the formal sophistication, which became quite quickly background, albeit perhaps through its finesse and therefore its easy habitability. I just got a wonderful letter from somebody who works up there, sort of marveling at the change of light throughout the day. And here a little workshop at MIT, typical of how I seek to tease out new creative engagement. Here I asked a group devise a synthome sculpture, the synthome or symptom, the figure invoked by Jacques Lacan, to try to elucidate James Joyce's creative drive, an interlacing ring binding the three rings of the Borromean knot, which was his model of psychic normalcy, a figure chosen by Lacan as being beyond the imaginary. So here we witness that a parametric generative engine brings the synthome surface within the imaginary, and we're able to witness quite easily the full range of its interlacing. A small variation between the rings and the synthome would reform itself quite dramatically. Another group looked to generate algorithms that would pass the complex curved surface into flat facets as trinodal platelets whose density and arrangement could be effortlessly recomputed. And another group then fed that information directly to a water jet CNC machine that effortlessly cut the aerated aluminum material. Later, designing with force then starts to become instrumentalized, the sort of conceptual extension of material imagination. As I mentioned, Derrida generally posits the other of form as force, the other of sign as trace, of energetics and relationships in general. A counterpoint or neglected twin of optic deterministic imagination. His student, Lucy Irigaray, suggesting mechanics of fluids, which is somehow hinted at not so much in the form as in the malleability of the conceptual methodology. So this was a workshop at MIT called Springy Thinking, where we devised a modeling paradigm based on springs that released particles into equilibrium chains. Any gestural input would leave a temporal trace in the air with neighboring particles merging by relational force, giving highly articulate surfaces as form-force lines. The students improvised their project at the final review, literally gesturing it as an intuitive force net in front of the, in real time. So they designed their project in the final 20 minutes of the semester, much to the astonishment of the jury used to critiquing the laboured design methodology of linear creative process. And since the relationships, zillions of relationships are computed real time, so there is effortless integrity as a rule-based logic being tempered by intuitive sculpting. The implicit suggestion is for an architectural immanence of latency. The students designing the possibility of an architecture that is then orchestrated quite effortlessly, nuanced form but from the computational ether, rather than relying on expert composition. This is not composed as a privileging of a distant optic sense, but sampled with bodily implication. A later iteration is more suggestive yet of what I call an active variability of material property. Here's sun and wind animating the form force and causing both dynamic responsiveness but also material property variance. The coloration, sort of chemical staining of material attribute, changing in real time. So let's look back historically and think through the current trend to design research. If we look back 2,500 years to a moment of decisive apparatus change, the adoption and absorption of alphabetic writing by the classical Greeks, so we indeed witness profound changes in intellection, personal identity, and socio-political structure under influence of a new technical mnemonic, the ability to record words. The alphabet, a highly abstract form of inscription and memory, seeped into Greek thinking and doing over a 300-year period, to the point that a small group of countercultural thinkers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and others, began to assert a new mode of being, that of literate rationality. Counterculture against an oral tradition of gods and fate and spirits as the organizing creator, which were contested in every aspect as the cognitive logic of writing took hold. Law and justice, a democratic state, reasoned argument, categories of knowledge, an academy. Socrates, of course, murdered for sedition of youth. This new order was a dangerous proposition. Plato having to flee for his life as he upset the tyrant of Syracuse. Initially, Hesiod, for instance, collected instances of justice, which only later Plato could then conceptualize as a notion of justice, only as a result of their being recorded, a form of data mining. Likewise, the writing down of the oral tragedies permitted new forms of drama to emerge, individuals separating from the chorus, causality displacing fate, the complex reflection allowed by text becoming manifest as a new form of selfhood, critical self-identity, and Socrates often held to be the first self. And that knowledge apparatus, augmenting conceptual analytical aspects of intellect, became refined and reified. Plato kicked out the poets, Aristotle banned homophones with puns as disturbing this privileged form of reasoning. Thesis, a declarative statement that is to be interrogated by thorough research, still the privileged form of educational praxis, but utterly denying any emotive or aesthetic aptitude. So oral see to literacy in its rationalizing principles, an essentially hermeneutic enterprise geared to abstract, unemotive, analytical knowing, universal, impartial, that endured well beyond the next significant technical medium appeared, that of the printing press. When another long period of assimilation began, the primacy of scripts came to be challenged by empirical reason, Bacon, Descartes asserting that dissemination of factual observation legitimate reason. But 100 years until Martin Luther declared every man a priest in the Reformation, and the modern novels of Cervantes and Dante published in Vulgate challenged the federated papacy, giving birth to nation states and a new motility of mind through the expanded channels of print media. And then Kant's salient three critiques, the Critique of Pure Reason of 1781, that began to assert other forms of intellection, more emotive, placing us within thought, and raising the spectrum of aesthetics and, if you will, engagement of aspects of human intellect that had hitherto been repressed. A new emotive mentality as the industrial era starts with its percussive revolutions in audio-visual media. And if we're attentive, thesis began to be challenged by theopraxis, thinking, creating, doing, by forms of motivated knowing, invoking Kant's three critiques in the opening up of other areas of cognition, the start of an inventive. Freud presses home the subjective aesthetics demanded by Kant, identifying areas of cognition and human aptitude repressed by literate rationality, sexuality, emotion, dreams, all being opened up by these new media as latent to industrial sensibility. And Heidegger, as we've remarked, insisting that the essence of technology lies in our cognitive adaptation and the creativity demands. And they bracket the 2,500-year timeline with Derrida and his student Irigaray, and Derrida, the philosopher of electric media, which powerfully absorb and make accessible all prior revolutions, elucidating a new form of being, again after about 150, 200 years of trouble in the emerging mechanical works, with the digital establishing a new social apparatus across all registers, just as the alphabet did for the ancient Greeks. Our own history as a discipline, also born of a technical revolution, the invention of perspective, with again a 100-year period of learning to draw the necessary cognitive conditioning for plans, sections, and elevations to become instrumentalized, the essentially deterministic sketch to serially reiterated final form, evidencing a similar enabling constraint as that of alphabetic rationality, enduring more or less intact until the spirited interwar avant-gardes, using Freud as the muse for a new dream world, started assemblage and collage as more legitimate in a photographic era, ready-mades that offered a jarringly emotive rebuke to the restrained design logic of the prior period. If I shift to a shorter timeline, then you have to assert that it is Freud as the great instigator of drives and motivated intellect, of invention, if you will. It's as if Kant's critiques burst through insistently, and Freud giving voice to all areas of repressed intellect, emotions, dreams, intuition, bodily drives, asking that these be accepted as part of us, and inventing a science of us in psychoanalysis, through a witnessing and bringing to play of that which was included. The uncanny is bringing to light of areas of intellectual and human capacity repressed. And as this new industrial intellect, seething with repressed energy, heads to war, literally two wars, then the avant-garde manifestos that burst into action as counterculture invention of a new order, futurism, Dada, surrealism, they attack every tenet of bourgeois sensibility. Particular André Breton's lucid surrealist manifesto, which is a theory of creativity, for a new mode of emotivated intellect, which was what was emerging so forcefully. So much was tested out during this restless period. Electracy for Ulmer, kick-started in the Industrial Revolution by a series of radical technical apparati, consolidated local practice in the aesthetic pleasure houses of Bohemian Europe, institutionalized into schools of architecture, art, industrial design, and ultimately commercialized into mainstream artwork and cultural and commercial production. In fact, I'd hold up the outcast, banned from Dada even, the buoyant and enigmatic Kurt Schwitters and his life work, The Merzbau, and his endless assemblage of nets, of stuff, of material detritus from the factories, as perhaps capturing better than anyone what was at stake, which is not just a new macaronic aesthetic of endlessly demotivated meaning, and he continually added to the Merzbau as an almost daily ritual, never letting it stabilize. What Rodanti Baduli, one of my students last year, called creative autobiography. He invented and de-invented and invented his persona through his creative work, prototypical avatar of an imminent electronic age. Who would deny the massive influence of the avant-garde and the radical bursting forth of late 20th century architecture, formally for sure, but in terms of the trope of creative autobiography that motivates every studio of architecture in every school worldwide, at least all the progressive ones, and architects such as Goulthporpe, Tom Lane, Frank Gehry, etc. And my schooling and cultural inheritance being one of restless experimentation, even prior to the emergence of digital platforms. But these, inspiration for me as young digital architect conceive abstract cyclical processes of languid complexity, a sort of material equivalent to the lysomatic, trippy logic of the information net. The training of the architect, one that encourages the speculation and importation of any frame of reference into an adapting creative engagement, so design as a form of renewal. And just before I leave this 2,000-year timeline and the shift from literacy to electracy as the dominant logic, I re-invoke Aristotle's tripartite account of all human actions: theory, in truth, poiesis, creation, and praxis, which is ethics, economics, politics, that getting things done, and which challenges us to devise adequate intellection in this new period of electracy. What replaces this? And the lucid Jacques Lacan, updating Freud for a new century, offering a counterpoint to Aristotle in his analysis of James Joyce's stunning Finnegan's Wake, which is of course composed from 1,000 little motors of invention, not written but fabricated, a rule-based and collaborative generative writing that bursts literacy into electracy and new forms of knowing. With the fourth ring, the symptom of a creative drive that completes or sutures the psychic being of Joyce. Jouissance, he calls it, and articulates the complex, inventive, emotive yearning of the little mechanic, which is what we've all become. A needs-met economy displaced by a desiring production. We're all Schwitterite, we're all in a mode of inventive learning, of motivated pedagogy. We architects perhaps the avant-garde of an experiment of digital pedagogy, otherwise known as design. So the Hypersurface project for me, not really so interesting in the technical research of I/O control logic or automated actuation, but as an investigation of creative process and alloplastic social reciprocity. As research of design in productive and receptive registers. The oddly disembodied figures, more morphing than collage, and the rhizomatic exchange of input and output of a now malleable architecture, emblematic of a new communal aesthetic, useful really only in its emotive register on the surface. Now everybody seems to want to focus on the technical research, the research behind the scenes of the actuators and the computational systems, but far more for me it was an experiment in social reciprocity, and really the Hypersurface, I think, leitmotif for an entirely reconfigured creative and receptive modality in electracy. endless sampling and adjustment of systems and arts. We had a lot of fun with this. It's been remarkably powerful as an interactive medium. A digital composer that we work with, Paul Stevens, I credit him with really thinking through the logic of this new soft reciprocal surface. You see the diagrams of the relationship of architecture, people, content. So here he divides that into some 750 found sounds for an event called Bio. It was a biotechnology show. And it goes up through the evolutionary ladder. And each sound set, see if I can give you a hint of that. Each sound set it comprises of wet to dry. So recognize the sound all the way through the highly synthesized sound. And as you engage with it, so it measures the anger and perversity of your voice. They were the two parameters. And it responds in a qualitative as well as a quantitative manner. And sound links to movement, links to you in an endless exchange. You probably not hear any of those sound files, so I'll skip on that. Again, very interesting in its computation for us. And then behind the scenes, of course, the latest EtherCAT servos we've been playing with, to give you some sense, where we're now sending multi-packets of information every thousandth of a second back and forth from these actuators, meaning that within a thousandth of a second, if it hits someone, you change the current, and a thousandth of a second is really a remarkably short period of time. Now, the oldest surviving discourse on architecture in the Western tradition is Vitruvius's De Architectura, written oddly by a ballistics engineer in exchange for a pension from the emperor. So by a highly specialized technical expert who distinguishes between the rationalis of the engineer and the subversia, mischief of the architect, but reserving great respect for this cunning and guile as an equal form of intellect. The architects diverted the aqueduct into the fields around a besieged city to create a quagmire that prevented approach of his marvelous ballistas. It's compelling to note, as does Bernard Cash, that Vitruvius never defined anything except by relationships, as if the fixity of the image had not taken hold of imagination prior to drawing being the dominant mode of spatial thinking. The proportions of temples as siege machines, all relative and variable, the weight and distance of a projectile determined by extremely complex algebra, the thickness of braided women's hair required for the plaited sinews, and these determining the holes through which they must be threaded, their spacing, and so on to the overall dimensions of the baluster. And Cash dwells on the remarkable Tower of the Winds by Andronicus from 5 BC, an armature for a series of time and weather technologies, a water clock, various sundials, a wind vane, the complexity of which and their exactitude at any time of year makes this a calculating machine, which he terms quite rigorously a computer. This then a computational design machine like shadow in space and time. You're not drawn but generated by geometric principles that would apply to any scale of such a building. And odd to think that the fixed, accurate planimetric drawing that we're so accustomed to in our habitude was really not part of classical or medieval praxis. The plan of the monastery of St. Gall from the 9th century, a quite perplexing document that seems to have fallen from heaven as an anomaly. In the Gothic period, there were never plans. They worked parametrically through simple schemata. An artist such as Michelangelo, after long training in sketching from life studies or ancient sculptures, then starts to devise complex figures that no longer depict reality but invented in complex compositions, a technically enabled imagination. Disegno therefore designates not so much the ability to draw, but the facility of being able to design, to deploy intellect creatively and holistically. And this is what gives the term disegno its characteristic gravitas of this period. So my interest in all these periods is to try to theorize the design apparatus, the full intellectual change becomes social praxis of the drawing machine or the given technology. So research into how any given design logic takes hold, but equally then the assertion that design is forever enabled only by technical import. In the Renaissance, in fact, several new apparati appear, a profound disjunctive impetus to all manner of cultural praxis. Perspective, a thrilling invention that the ancients had never attained, that gripped the intellection of everyone. The printing press, which upended a scripto-religious structure and allowed broad dissemination of textual and graphic ideas. Here Thomas More's Utopia as a key text that critiqued the existing order and opened up imagination to other organizational and intellectual horizons. Itself taking inspiration from the cartography of the period as the world was being discovered, the tantalizing depictions of new continents that exercised an extraordinary grip on popular imagination. So all these media developments, perspective, cartography, printing press, plus the availability of paper that was driven by the new print machines, feed imagination for some 100 years before the first proto-modern architects like Raphael determined the somewhat practical use of plan and section, a marginal aptitude acquired in the pursuit of perspective that we could now draw in complex 3D buildings, and that then suddenly bursts into evidence as a godlike mental capacity, a new planimetric aptitude that then manifests itself in a whole series of ideal town plans, Sports Cinder, the City of Truth, etc., of the subsequent period. Such seeing from above, unthinkable in the Gothic period, where drawings were not part of mental habitude. So graphic sensibility, 100 years of technical experimentation and aptitude formation, seems to shape the imagination itself. This is my take on drawing technology as the very issue of the discipline of architecture, I think. The Renaissance disegno. And of salient interest is to negotiate the current apparatus change to a digital paradigm, where technology, per Heidegger, will be the adaptation of cognition and its spatial material instantiation as a drawing out of new mental motility. If we then consider progressive contemporary works, for instance, the enigmatic yet remarkable plastic production of Tom Main and Morphosis, Pritzker Prize, AA gold medal, etc., as fated and established as any commercial architect. We might expect a design modality that departs vividly from such ancient forebears, yet consolidates into mainstream praxis the lessons of the avant-garde. And I thought it might be interesting to look at the research praxis of a pure design office, where it is the design process itself that is the vehicle of restless revision. These Tom Main's drawings, a series of generative, graphic, plastic, processual works executed by a team of people through a recession over a sustained period of 3 or 4 years. Alma points out that there are not many, but some.
Mark,
Yep.
Sorry, you could finish up that for
Okay, well, let me skip through this very briefly of Tom Main. So this is a background project where he has a team of people in his office playing graphically and plastically. When we went and interviewed him, he said the most vivid text of his formative period was Complexity and Contradiction of Robert Venturi. And it resonated with him that if we are to put complexity and contradiction back into the contemporary cities and not simply yield to the rationalizing tendencies of late industrial logics, then we were going to have to plan for them. And here at age 70, I think he culminates his remarkable body of work with this new creative praxis. So these are a series of about 20 drawings that are done in the background of his office and hung on the walls around the team of people. Sometimes they're put into combination. And then he showed us a couple of processes where these drawings are then culled for their spatial nuance, and they give birth to these very curious spaces where Tom said that the most wonderful moment is when the project architect is surprised by the space that results, meaning that it's no longer a controlled sort of analytical process. It's a speculative and creative one where the formative logic of the process is actually conceived well for the 2-week competition that a Korean cultural institution is offered. So his book Combinatory Urbanism, I think, is maybe it's the best book I can think of that testifies to the absorption of new design logics, mindful of the remarkable new digital media that we have, but offering a collaborative and quite humane new praxis and aesthetic, as we enter a fully electrate modality. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I was going to try to finish it with another project, but I've gone on way too long, so thank you for indulging me.
Thanks very much, Mark. We've got some time for questions, and it would be, I guess what strikes me is if you referring to Greg Ulmer's, what he says about apparatus and this idea of this new age of electracy. He actually then talks about identity and subject formation as part of that apparatus, and he as you know well, he sort of talks about your online self being part of that kind of relation to the apparatus. And it strikes me that in some ways what the work you show has been incredibly tactile, incredibly immersive and ergonomic. And it seems that you're sort of bringing in a relationship between architecture and the body, which is very different from that sort of interpretation of selfhood through your online existence. So I just wanted to see whether you had any further thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, he makes the point very forcefully that in any change of technology, 3 things alter. Intellection, so how we think and engage. So as the alphabet comes in, you start to be able to rationalize it, you can write things down and sort of think about them more thoroughly. Identity. So identity formation is always an issue. So the self, self-reflection, ancient Greeks, comes into play, and then the social structure. So democracy replaces, tribal collectivism, and his interest is, of course, in articulating the shift from literacy to electracy, and so all those 3 registers he's pursuing, and he's doing it in terms of pedagogy. So he's one of the few people I think that tried to think through what it means for classroom, and he's trying to think through what's the place of the university in terms of a new global structure. I mean, in terms of our very humble work by comparison with Grand Enterprise, I think I'm most fascinated by the new utilities of mind of an alloplastic relationship with computation. So this reciprocal exchange of massive computation, and you end up sampling, rather than creating, you're setting up rules and witnessing and teasing things out, as you saw with some of those student projects, and literally intuitively engaging massive computation. And I see that just as something that's going to become ubiquitous. So we're already seeing cloud computing. So there's that whole new relationship of creativity. Obviously, personal definition. There's a new liberated sort of avatarism, and I tried to hint at that with the last festival. But I think the reason I get pleasure from that thing is because in my daily round, I've got my organic blueberries here, so that's one identity I have, and my Prada shoe is another. There's a constellation of different identities that we're coursing through without even realizing it. And we're perfectly capable now of sort of contradictory. So there's a reciprocity between our own definition and the objects and processes that we're engaging. And I see that the hypersurfaces, Ulma loves it because it's the kind of leitmotif of this newly plastic relationship. The architect creates nothing except the interface by which people find themselves. And that's what I think for me what's beautiful about hypersurface in a way is that it's a nothing. It's a flat surface that only comes into being through the agency of people. And all you're doing is working with a very skilled composer, a very skilled interactive artist to find a modality by which that is effective. And so that emotional exchange, people discover themselves and it triggers their own memories. It's not any longer a representative, this means that, and the architect has fixed it. But even then in the fixed works, like that wooden interior, which in many ways I think is more successful in hypersurface, I think you're looking, how does this space get shaped by the actions of the people that are there? So, and by the necessary air coming in, light coming in. So the whole thing is almost, again, it's a nothing that's shaped by the social and technical forces around it, and you're just sort of leaving it hanging. And I think my dream is to create some systems that are sufficiently elegant that it almost doesn't matter what their final form is. They sort of come into being through all of the different expertise. So we had a lighting engineer who decided where the lighting needed to be. I didn't mind, it just played itself through the system. And there's been a couple of projects, and the next one I was going to show was one where we created this insanely complex parametric model. And the most beautiful moment was when we had a planning meeting in London. It was a tower top in London. And the planner, as always, said, I think it's too high. You have to lower it by a foot, knowing that you have to be sort of salt in your soup, separatism of things. And I had my computer PhD in the parametric model sitting in the corner, and so he took the book. And we adapted it real time in front of the planner. And there was this incredible moment where the planner went silent, everybody went silent. And suddenly we could have this communal exchange of what was better, real time in front of this thing. And the planner, he just backed right off and he said, you're absolutely right. I can see why you designed it. So now I get the reason you've done it. And for me, it was beautiful because I didn't care what the final form was particularly. What I found most rewarding was that suddenly you had a community of different expertise. The environmental engineer, the structural engineer, the client worrying about the view, the planner worrying about what it looked like on the skyline. And everybody was around this malleable, reciprocal, new design entity. And I found that very rewarding. So I think in that there's a hint of new social structure, new intellection, maybe not yet socio-political, but that's coming too. It's a breakup of the nation state into new groupings of community, university, and I see MIT as increasingly a place for policy formation, where we convene discussions around salient global issues like environment, and everybody comes, the money men, the politicians, everyone. It almost seems like a more effective venue than the Capitol in Washington as a means of actually. So I predict the politics of the nation states will seed inevitably to new groupings of citizenry, or netizenry. It's no longer a citizen, it's a netizen. So, all the way from in scale, that's all what I'm after.